COVID-19 and international solidarity. My name is Paula Peters and I am on the National Steering Group of Disabled People Against Cuts and chair of Bromley and Croydon Unite community. We've got a fantastic lineup of speakers for you tonight. And before we begin, we'd like to welcome all of you to the meeting. And, you know, with the beginning of the coronavirus, you know, disabled people have suffered immensely under austerity and welfare policies brought in by neoliberal governments. But COVID-19 and the government's responses to it have highlighted even more starkly the inequalities and oppression that exist within society. And disabled people have been disproportionately represented among those that have died in the UK, and that from the 15th of March to the 2nd of May, there has been 22,500 disabled people who have died, compared to 15,000 non-disabled people. And may I say that one death is one too many. We remember each one of those in our hearts and minds, and we grieve with each of their families. The picture has emerged is very similar to the world over in terms of how disabled people who were more at risk from COVID-19 were largely ignored, but also discriminated against in official responses to the pandemic. Tonight's meeting brings together disabled activists from across the globe to present the experiences of disabled people in their countries and to consider how disabled campaigners can organise and resist under current conditions. In the first half, we will hear from disabled campaigners in Sweden, hopefully Greece, Ireland, and the United States. And we will be having our access break, which is going to be a live access break tonight, around about 7:30. And we're going to be having live poetry tonight from Rob Punton, myself, Paula Peters, and hopefully Mark Thompson if he's about. Now, if people would like to use the comments section of whatever platform, Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter, on what you're watching, we hope to have some read out in towards the end. We hope to finish by 8:45 to 8:50, and the hashtag for tonight's meeting is Every Death Counts. So let me repeat that, Every Death Counts. Now, to start the meeting, we are going to get an overview of the situation in the UK from a number of perspectives. And it gives me great pleasure to welcome to the meeting tonight Ellen Clifford, our Solidarity Sister from DPAC, and of course, the author of War on Disabled People, Capitalism, Welfare, and the Making of a Human Catastrophe, which was published by Z Books, to talk about the historic attitudes towards disabled people and the responses to the coronavirus. So Ellen, hello, and over to you.
Thanks, Paula. So I think that government responses to the COVID-19 pandemic have really sharply reflected the lack of worth that's commonly placed on disabled people's lives. In the UK, Prime Minister Boris Johnson and his chief political advisor, Dominic Cummings, initially seemed to adopt a strategy of creating herd immunity, as it's called. In other words, to let COVID-19 spread so that immunity would be built up across the population as a whole. The consequence of that approach, of course, is that those at risk who don't develop immunity become seriously ill or die. Disabled people are disproportionately among those at risk. And that's been borne out by the death statistics that Paula read out in the introduction. The stats are striking. For example, disabled women under the age of 65 have been 11 times more likely to die of COVID in the UK than non-disabled women of the same age. Now, the government denies it ever actually officially adopted a herd immunity strategy, but it was definitely too slow to introduce lockdown. It's been estimated that if lockdown had come about earlier, then it could have saved 20,000 lives. The decision to end lockdown before people needed to stop shielding under NHS advice has now put even more lives at risk. Taking the government's approach to the pandemic together with those welfare reform and austerity measures that hit disabled people so hard since they were introduced in 2010 have led disabled campaigners to wonder if the government's failure to do more to protect disabled people against COVID was part of a deliberate plan to remove from society those whose lives are deemed to represent a cost burden on the state. And that's not inconceivable. Inequality is a state that Boris Johnson and Dominic Cummings both regard as natural and even desirable for the functioning of society. Both have expressed views described by author and campaigner Roddy Slorak, among others, as textbook examples of eugenic opinion. Speaking to city bankers during his time as Mayor of London, Johnson is recorded as having said, "Whatever you think of the value of IQ tests, it's surely relevant to a conversation about equality that as many as 16% of our species have an IQ below 85. The harder you shake the pack, the easier it will be for some cornflakes to get to the top." As advisor to then Education Secretary Michael Gove, Cummings wrote a 250-page thesis in which he claimed that genetics is a greater factor in educational outcomes than teaching. At the end of February, as the COVID outbreak was taking shape in Britain, it was reported that at one private event, Cummings outlined the government's strategy at the time in a way that was summarised by some of those present as herd immunity, protect the economy, and if that means some pensioners die, too bad. The allegations were strongly denied by the government, but they connect with wider criticisms that the government's response to the virus was initially too weak due to their overriding concern to let the economy keep working. Throughout the pandemic, the government's clearly put the interests of profit above those of people. And that's also consistent with their approach since 2010. The dismantling of the social security safety net over which the Tories have presided has served the interests of business, who've gained through privatisation of public services and through the introduction of a much harsher benefits system. The experience of being on out-of-work benefits has now become unbearable, and that's deliberate. It's a deliberate strategy so that those in work will be more willing to accept worsening pay and conditions. And these interests have been promoted regardless of the steep human cost. The way they were justified was through a vicious narrative of benefit scroungers that inflamed hostility against disabled people. Within that hostility, eugenic ideas and actual hatred towards disabled people have been evident. A glance at the online comment section under mainstream media features on disability commonly show just how strongly some people feel that the society is better off with disabled people aborted or dead. These attitudes become particularly dangerous in times of economic recession, when the ruling class is looking for scapegoats. With another global recession on the horizon, this is something disabled people need to guard against. It means that all forms of solidarity become even more important, and that's why I'm so pleased that tonight's international solidarity event is happening. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank everyone taking part. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Ellen. That was a great start to the meeting, and great to see you. So thanks very much. Now, next up, we have Mark Williams, disability activist and campaigner and founding member of Bristol Reclaiming Independent Living, BRIL for short, to talk about disabled people's experiences during the pandemic. Mark, welcome to the meeting, and over to you.
Hello everyone.
Early on in the COVID-19 pandemic, the UK government used the crisis to bring in emergency laws and guidance, which threatened disabled adults and children's rights. One worrying example was the guidance that stopped hospitals' inpatients in England having visitors, including personal assistants, although exceptions for some people were made following pressures from campaigners. Still, the guidance still meant that many disabled people would be denied support. I was anxious that if I needed to be admitted to hospital during the current times, the visitors' policies that were in place would not allow my PAs to attend with me to enable me to communicate with hospital staff. The NHS cannot provide this. I know it was a scary time, not just for me, but for all other people with communication, sensory and care needs that were facing similar worries. Through a fellow independent given, we contacted a law firm specializing in public law and human rights. And the letter before claim was written to the NHS England and my two local trusts. We argued that the policy was discriminatory and put disabled at risk. We felt that the failure to make responsibility adjustments for disabled people. With communication and social care needs. It was a breach of our human rights. In early June, NHS England agreed to change their hospital visitor policy as a memorial victory. However, as is so often the case, they have rewritten the policy without any consideration or input for disabled people's organisations. Meaning the policy is still only discriminatory for all NHS trusts. With another disabled campaigner, Fiona Perry, we have set up a petition. Demanding that the NHS and the UK government consult with disabled people when planning NHS and health policies. We know that disabled people's rights have been threatened in countries across the world during the pandemic. The deaths of disabled people have been inevitable. As we are seen as a burden on the health service and the economy. Many parts of the media and government have allowed these eugenic ideas to grow. As disabled people, we need to work together internationally and pressure all states to ensure our full rights. Under the Yoon Convention of the Rights of Disabled People. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mark, for a great presentation. And thank you for being with us tonight. It was great to hear from you. It now gives me great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, which is Julie J. Charles. Julie is Executive Director of Start Change. And without further ado, over to you, Julie.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. It's nice to actually touch base virtually for those of you that do know me. Anyway, Start Change, my organisation is a new style disabled people's organisation for BAME and people of colour. I say BAME, Black, Asian, Minority, Ethnic, and people that relate to being or prefer to be called a person of colour. Now, I think that what Mark just said about working together is such a good point, because for many years, what I've experienced as a CEO of Equality's National Council was that the disability movement wasn't really working to support BAME disabled people organisations. What it was actually doing was helping to get advice from BAME organisations, but not helping to actually develop them. So I think that working together is a big area, and this is what we want to bring Start Change in. Start Change is going to be a new style organisation that's going to have local hubs, regional hubs, and we're going local to global. And it's going to start on the grassroots level as an organisation that reaches out to people in the communities, has discussion with them at our People's Council, and actually take up any issues that people are saying about service provision, about their lives, about day-to-day issues that they may not be able to tell anyone else, and actually take that to our ambassadors who will be on a regional level, and the local, I'm getting mixed up here, the local ones will actually be able to go to local authorities, any type of organisation, department, to try to get people support and link that support up regionally, trying to work with the National Office of Statistics to actually get the numbers of disabled people across the country. Now, the last census, I was able to get the figures. I don't know if anyone else has them, but there was the amount of BAME disabled people across the country. And in Newham alone, Newham in London, there was 36,500 BAME disabled people. In Waltham Forest, there was 42,000 BAME disabled people, and the list went on and on and on. Now we're going through a pandemic, and most of the people, or a lot of people that have been affected by this, has been from the BAME community, and it's important that we start thinking post-COVID, what are we going to put in place for the thousands of people that are going to need the extra support on the grassroots level, so that their voices can be taken up to a regional and international level, so that things change. It's important that BAME disabled people's lives matter, just like Black Lives Matter. BAME disabled people's lives matter too. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Janet, for a great contribution. And
Lovely.
everyone, please look out for Start Change and see how you can support and show solidarity. Now, it gives me absolutely great pleasure to introduce our next guest speaker this evening. And we have with us Janet Karanja, disabled asylum seeker and member of DPAC Bristol and South West. So Janet, over to you.
I'm Janet, as you can hear, and can you hear me? Am I on the line? Hello?
Hi, Janet. Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, all right, okay. Well, I just...
Janet, could you just turn your video on, please?
Okay, wait a little bit.
Thank you.
Wait a minute. You know, these technologies. Is that okay now? Is the video on now?
The video isn't on, sorry, no, it was on very quickly.
Oh.
Or if not, don't worry, we can just...
Is it now on?
It's on.
Yeah?
Yeah.
All right. Okay, thank you. Well, I am Janet, and I'm a asylum seeker in Bristol, and I would like to speak about few things about disabled people and most about we asylum seekers. As this lockdown has been in since March, we have been struggling as asylum seekers, disabled and undisabled. The main problem we have been getting as asylum seekers is that all the shops you could have not buy anything if you don't have any card for bank card. And most of us asylum seekers, we are not eligible to open an account. So that was one of the challenges, because you have to find somebody to go with or to send with the money and give money so that they can be able to buy something to use. So that is one of the challenges that we asylum seekers we have get. And another challenge we have got is about food, because as we asylum seekers, you know very well, we live by £5 a day. And so we have been locked down. £5 cannot be enough, because normal days we have been going out. We have been going out and eat to a refugee rights or somewhere else, and you can go to this food bank and get something to eat. So it has been very, very hard for people to live without managing food, or without getting outside, or without getting any help from anybody. And to this government, we have noticed that they never consider asylum seekers, refugees, or disabled, or whoever. They don't recognize the problems that we get, because they never add even a penny to those people who has been locked down. So that has been great challenge that we have been getting too much. Also, as we disabled people being in the lockdown, it has been terrible, because people who are having mental health things, health problems, we have been locked down, and so instead of getting better, we have been deteriorating, because you can't be allowed to be seen by anybody, and still you are hungry, you are not eating the right diet. So the challenges has been too much at this duration. And so as we continue to be in this lockdown, because also we didn't have a future, we didn't know whether this coronavirus will carry on until death or until which year. So we have been in a great challenges, and we have been going through hell at that difficult moment. Not even now, we have not yet gone through, because we don't have anybody to help us. So we as refugees, we have really suffered in this country. And our prayer and our request to the government, or to everyone who is doing this campaign, is to let them know that asylum seekers, disabled and undisabled, we are all human beings, and we should be considered and be treated as other people. At exactly when a disaster like this one comes, they should know that a £5 could not be enough for somebody who has been locked down. You can die with hunger without nobody taking care of you. Not only that, we have been trying to call the GP, and they say they cannot be able to see anybody because of this coronavirus. So we have been suffering pain, depression, anxiety, and this trauma, and so it has not been good for us. And so I don't want to add too much, but we should be looked after as other people, and we should appreciate one another, because we can live. You can't live without me, and I can't live without you. So please, whoever is talking on behalf of us, please remember asylum seekers are suffering a lot. Thank you so much for listening to me. Thanks. And to you again.
Janet, thank you so much for your amazing contribution. And I'm sure everyone would join with me that you have our complete and total solidarity, and everything we can do to support you, we will do. Now, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our next guest speaker, and this is a late addition to our meeting, but very welcome, Eleanor Lisney, who is co-founder of Sisters of Frida and member of Greenwich DPAC. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Eleanor. And so Eleanor, over to you.
Thank you, Paula. Can you see me, hear me? Yes?
Yes.
Great. Thank you, and I am greatly moved by Janet's speech before. I'm here because Ellen asked me sort of at last minute to talk about our briefing from Sisters of Frida about disabled women and the impact of COVID-19. Basically, we wrote that briefing because we were asked by a number of women's organizations for statistics for what we think about the impact of COVID-19 on disabled women, specifically women. And then we realized that there was no such impact that was written anywhere, so we had to write our own. And in that briefing, which we put together quite quickly, we asked disabled women's voices, to give quotes about how they have felt that impact. And we tried to go as widely as possible, specifically on disabled women's issues. And of course, some of them would cross with disabled people, like access to food, medications, etc. But there's some specific things which are women's issues. For example, disabled mothers, how they cope, because suddenly they have no support. Similar situations with PAs, but if you have children, you will understand how suddenly that you are locked in with, children in a small flat, and you can't go out because you are shielding or under general COVID-19 restrictions anyway. We also covered disabled women in prisons, about their condition. We also talked about disabled domestic abuse survivors, and they are the impact is quite hard on them, especially those with learning difficulties. They don't understand why the social workers or their advocates with whom they had one-to-one support before, they can't anymore. And if they were deaf, how, they would ask to just use their telephone. So these are some of the issues that we covered, and we also had a lot of recommendations. And this report was quite well picked up by other women's organizations. Generally, they were quite happy to have our input, and it's been generally written into other people's reports. For example, EVOR, which is the elimination of women against, elimination of violence against women. That's it, EVOR. And people like IMCAN, they have publicized our work. Anyway, I think I was asked to speak for 2 minutes, and that should cover it, unless you want me to speak more. Paula?
Thanks, Ellen. Thanks, Eleanor, for your contribution. It was absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. And to everybody watching, please do look up Sisters of Frida and the amazing work that Eleanor and everyone at Sisters of Frida are doing. And it now gives me a great pleasure to introduce our final speaker for our UK section tonight, my fellow DPAC brother, and I'd say our organizer, direct actions extraordinaire, Andy Greene. Andy's going to be talking about the way forwards in the UK and hopefully internationally. So Andy, over to you, and thanks for being here tonight.
Thank you, Paula. If you can give me a shout when I got about half a minute left, because I won't see any messages. Thank you for having me on, and buy Ellen's book if you haven't bought it already. So I think there's a lot to be said for kind of taking pause and pausing and taking stock and just kind of thinking about where we go now. And when I'm doing that, I'm kind of thinking on 3 or 4 different things that are possible. And I think we begin where we're at. And I think the incredible work that has been done by DPAC members and campaigns right across the last decade, right across the country. And I think we have to make sure that we are maintaining that level of pressure and that level of work, because that has got us to where we are at. And we have to kind of make sure that we're valuing that and continuing on with that, and not be afraid to continue with direct action, civil disobedience, those mass actions that build allyships and build networks. And that's the second bit, really, is reaching out and kind of making sure that as we progress, we are more demanding, I think, of both our comrades on the left and the institutions of the left. I think that, over the last 6 months, I think there's been not just a real kind of exposure of what disabled people mean to the government, but also kind of what the messaging and the demands of the disabled people's movement means to the larger movement on the left. And I think we have to reinforce those demands and key messages over and over again with those comrades who are taking our demands into the wider conversations. I think that's been really, really important, that we have had those strong demands over the last few years. And I don't really see huge amounts of that reflected going when you look around at you now. So, whether it's the trade unions or whether it is, the current Labour Party or whatever institutions we're talking about on the left, I don't think they have really done justice to the work put in of the disabled people's movement over the last 10 years by reflecting that work in a series of kind of key conversations with us. So I think that's been largely missing, and we need to be more sharp around that. I think we need to be more visionary and aspirational, and that's kind of linked into the kind of fourth strand of what I was going to talk about, which is being specific. I think we have to stop talking about change and actually being really specific about what we want to see, what we want to transition to, and how we do that. Because I think the ground is ready now. Whatever else is going on, and disabled people have been shockingly dealt with. This is a horrible pandemic that wasn't unpredicted and wasn't unforeseen, and certainly disabled people have been sacrificed right across this country.
Final 30 seconds.
Thank you. So yeah, I do think that being aspirational and specific about the things that we want to see, and I think Neil's the National Independent Living Support Service is a fantastic example of that, and we need to keep going on with and developing those kinds of ideas about where we want to get to, and bring other interested parties into that conversation that can help us to get there. So yeah, thanks for having me on. Those are the things that I think we need to do. Back to you, Paul.
Thank you so much, Andy, for wrapping up the UK section of the meeting tonight, for some absolutely spot on and straight to the point comments tonight. And now we're going international, and we're going to be hearing from some of our disabled international counterparts. So without further ado, as we are running behind schedule a little bit, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our first international speaker of the evening. and many of you may know George from Facebook. George Berger, retired teacher of philosophy, who lived in Holland and now lives in Sweden, who's going to be speaking for the next 8 minutes of the situation for disabled people in Sweden. So George, over to you.
Okay, can you hear me, Paula? Paula? I hope it's okay.
Oh yeah, we can hear you, George. There's just something in front of the webcam.
Okay, I guess it will come online. Should I start talking?
Yes, if you just want to.
Oh, okay, I don't care. That's fine. Well, my name is George, and I live in Uppsala, Sweden, after living for 36 years in the Netherlands, and now 12 years in Sweden as a retired person, disabled. What I'm going to do is probably have a different take on this because it's in other countries at least. So I'm going to start with what Ellen said about herd immunity, and I want to expand on that a little bit. What Ellen said is that herd immunity as a goal of some sort, what the governments are trying to do, involved a lot of deaths, and especially to old, ill, and disabled people. I want to explain very briefly why that's so. And by the way, this is international. It is happening, as far as I know, with good knowledge in Great Britain, the Netherlands, and Sweden. And Sweden is right now an epicenter of this. So let me begin in any case and explain what happens, what is happening with herd immunity. The governments say that their expressed goal with whatever they are doing is to mitigate, that is the official word they use, mitigate, lessen the damage of the spread in order to preserve the care system of healthcare, which might collapse under extreme use of the facilities by ill and disabled and everybody actually, thanks to COVID-19. They do not say that this is to save the economy. In fact, it's either never mentioned or explicitly denied. And that's simply false. It's actually both, to save the care system and to save the economy. And the reason is very simple, and I think it's been overlooked, that if you look at the care system and the rest of the entire industrial and social activity of a given country, then that sum, as it were, is the economy, the whole thing taken together, care and everything else. That is what's being attacked by COVID-19 and ideologists of various governments. So what happens then is that you have one effect on the entire system of this virus that the government wants to slow down, or rather slow down the damage. Now, when that happens, they might get this herd immunity, which is a pretty natural byproduct of such things with vaccines. Hello? Hello? Okay. They might get this herd immunity, but it is extremely doubtful because as far as we know, it has never been attempted with human beings without a vaccine, which is what is happening now. So you have, as a result of all of this that I have mentioned, you have a protected economy, which they deny is going on. You have a protected care system, which to some extent is going on. And you have the herd immunity, maybe, but probably not. So we have, these are three goals instead of that one goal of preserving the care system. Now, just ask yourself what this implies. First of all, because of the really horrible effect of the COVID-19 on disabled and everybody else, you have a lot of deaths, as it were, I hate to use the word, but it's absolutely true now, collateral damage. The government couldn't care less. No government really cares less. So it's a typical example of what people would normally call a case where the ends justify the means, where the ends are protecting as much of the economy and care system as possible to protect big business and their bank accounts. That is what is actually happening as far as I could see. And the means are simply causing a lot of deaths as collateral damage by trying to mitigate the effects of the virus, and typically old disabled people being sent home from hospitals, in Sweden, by the way, not admitted at all and dying at home because they cannot get any care, as one speaker in fact mentioned, but that is how it connects. I am such a person, and I am scared out of my mind at times, and I think quite justifiably. So what do we have? We have a kind of eugenics that is called social Darwinism, which means, in this case, that the stronger and younger people will survive this mostly, while the older and less able people of all sorts will pass away, will die, be killed, as it were, because the younger people have a better functioning immune system than older and ill people do. It can protect itself, the system, against the virus better than that of an elderly person or a disabled person. So you have, in terms of statistics, fewer deaths among able and especially younger able people than you do amongst older people. That is how this whole set of ideas hangs together. And that is a kind of social Darwinism. There are different definitions of that term, but in terms of letting the most able, the young, as I call it, the young and fit, mostly survive, that is social Darwinism. And in that sense, it's perfectly also utilitarian in this sense of the ends justifying the means.
George,
The deaths be
now, please.
Oh, okay, I'm finished.
Oh,
Hello?
brilliant.
I'm finished. So that's eugenics, and I've said everything I want. I hope it's comprehensible. Okay, thank you, Paula.
Thank you so much, George, for your great contribution. You've said some absolutely brilliant stuff there, and which a great many of us can relate to. And it's been brilliant to have you on with us. And thank you for joining us, although confused as to what was in front of your camera, and we're having a lot of comments. Is what was that?
I don't know. I tried to find out what it was, but I couldn't. It was just some object. I have no idea.
Well, it's great to have you, George. Thank you very much.
Okay, my pleasure.
Tonight. Okay, take care now. Now, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our next international speaker, and we're going over to Ireland now. And we're going to Stuart Neilson, autistic campaigner, lecturer and writer. So Stuart, over to you if you're online.
Hello, I hope everyone can hear me. At the beginning of this, I felt a lot of amazing positivity about some of the things that we are doing. So in all of that disaster of the pandemic, the two organizations that I'm involved with found that they needed to communicate with clients in new ways. And the interesting thing for me was that the clients were already doing that we already make our friendships online, we already buy our necessities through friends, through other people's vehicles, through buying things through Chinese websites. And we're the experts. And the two organizations that I'm involved in recognized that expertise and started using it. And then they've gradually realized they have a very good way of contacting a wider range of clients across a broader geographical range, much more economically than the way that they were doing things in the past. And I'm hoping a lot of that will survive. And the staff were very quick to recognize that they, as able people, knew how to do these things, but being able to do it, being able to use something is very different from relying on it as your life. This is the way we have our friendships. This is the way we shop. This is the way we work remotely. And they've done it as a fun thing to do on the beach when you're on a holiday overseas, but they haven't done it as a necessity of their own life until now. But I felt then, which was a previous government, our government has changed just at the end of our lockdown. So we used to have a Fine Gael government, and it's changed. We felt we had the ear of the previous government. But as we're coming out of lockdown, I'm hearing an awful lot about Zoom burnout and working from home burnout, and organizations saying, we're not actually geared up for this, or we have all this investment in our buildings and our infrastructure, and we need to get back to the economy. So I'm hoping that some of this will survive, but at the same time, I'm very worried that it's not, and some of the signs are bad. We've had a government incentive to ask towns and cities to give more space to cyclists and pedestrians and for access to socially distance. And here in Cork, that impetus has been taken over by businesses. And in the worst example of it, there's an entire street in Cork City, which is a restaurant alfresco eating area from one end to the other, with pavements which are too narrow for people to walk down two abreast, let alone taking a wheelchair or a buggy or any other kind of access needs down it. And it's now a dining place where no rough sleeper can sleep any longer. No person who doesn't look like a customer can use that street any longer. So far from making the city more accessible, it's like it's been taken away. And then parents, which for autistic people, we're very much divided into the parents and the clients. Parents of autistic people have taken over the new narrative, and it's all about getting their kids back to school because we've just had enough of them at home over the summer. It's just been too long, 3 months of our kids at home. So we feel that the bars and the parents and the businesses and the crashes and whatever all want to open now, and they have a much stronger lobby, so that voice is being taken away. In the eugenics, there's a very strong, it's not even undertone, it's an explicit eugenic statement that the vulnerable are at risk, the vulnerable might die, and we're placing that against the economy. And I felt over the past decade, this has got stronger very slowly. And then with the pandemic, it's become almost acceptable to express outright hateful eugenic speech in a way that people wouldn't have done 5 or 10 years ago. And that's been a real shock, that do people actually mean to kill? And it's almost like I'm embarrassed to entertain the idea that somebody has that notion in their head, but a lot of the writing. I've had a conversation with a local journalist where I was trying to point out some of the difficulties that the illness and deaths were highly concentrated in vulnerable groups: disabled people, Black people, insecurely employed people, deprived people, and people in any kind of overcrowded congregated settings like nursing homes. And his response to that was, it's less of a terrible loss. And I found that shocking, that a journalist would commit that to writing in interviewing somebody. And the second one was a business group where a number of rough sleepers had been making use of benches and outside furniture. And they said, we have to deal with this problem. And I said, yes, you've got to provide resources for those rough sleepers. And it's no, they need a bit of Corona. It's exactly what we need to get rid of these people. And when I challenged that, it was in a pandemic where our services are likely to be overwhelmed. We urgently need to provide care and facilities for the people who contribute. And you've obviously had the NHS and ICE guidelines that use very explicitly clinical frailty, that people who score a 5 or more are less likely to get critical care than people who score a 1 up to 4. And I think I'm around the 4. area. So hearing that idea that people are going to be graded, and you've had GP surgeries who have sent out in the post do not resuscitate forms. And the state of Alabama has said people with functional impairment, such as mental retardation, won't receive ventilation. And the former cabinet secretary, Gus O'Donnell, wrote this very long document called When to Release the Lockdown, a Wellbeing Framework for Analyzing Costs and Benefits, where well-being has been turned into money, the effect on the economy and the population of being well and working, which is a 1 person per year, being mentally ill, which is a 0.8, and being disabled, which is a 0.5. So it's like quality adjusted life years, disability adjusted life years, turned into a very direct, this is how the economy should be opened up. We can bear these losses more easily than the other losses. And it's somebody with a long reputation of civil service work. And Ireland, I think we've got the goodwill here, but not necessarily following up. And for example, we have a Department of Health ethical framework for decision-making in the pandemic that says very specifically that medical attention should protect the interests of vulnerable populations and seek to ensure that measures do not increase health inequalities. And I think that's quite out of line with almost everything I've read worldwide that says we have to preserve the rare medical resources for the people who are most likely to survive. And I think here, this idea of fairness and reciprocity is wonderful to hear. But at the same time, we have no legislation on IVF. We have no legislation on pre-implantation genetic diagnosis. So if you have a gene for autism or hearing loss or any other kind of disability, you can come to Dublin and get a pre-implantation genetic diagnosis to make sure you don't have offspring with those disabilities. So I'd say, as a conclusion, we've had some fantastic things. We've got a lot of goodwill. We felt we had the ear of the government, but now I feel that's slipping away as people come out of lockdown and they're in a desperate rush to get the economy up again. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Stuart, for speaking tonight. It's been an absolutely amazing contribution. I want to thank all of the speakers in the first half of the meeting tonight from across the UK and from Sweden and from Ireland for your amazing contributions tonight. We are now wrapping up the first half and we are going into a live access break. And we are going to be hearing some live poetry performances for all you viewers on YouTube, Facebook and on Twitter. Please keep the hashtag going, every death counts. And so a free poetry performance from myself, Paula Peters, from fellow disability activist and DPAC member Rob Punton, and from a great poet, Mark Thompson. So we're going to begin the access break now. And I'm going to read you a piece of poetry I wrote back in 2016. And there was an awful lot of comments that started this piece of poetry for me, called Cracks in the System. And it's about benefit sanctions, which is very prevalent now with conditionality and benefit sanctions beginning again for many people who've just started claiming universal credit, and especially those furloughed workers and new claims for universal credit who are going to find out the absolute horrors of conditionality and benefit sanctions. So I want to read this piece that I wrote called Cracks in the System that was performed in March 2017 in Parliament for the Unite Community Day of Action Against Benefit Sanctions. So this is called Cracks in the System. No food in the fridge, no food at home. Benefits stopped, I'm all alone. Support services stopped, nowhere to go. Scared shitless, I feel so low. Water cut off, electricity too. Have no toilet paper for the loo. Can't have a bath, I'm starting to stink. I am so hungry, I cannot think. I end up in crisis, I sit and I cry. I can't take any more, I just want to die. I end up in A&E, blood on the floor. I can't take the stress, I can't take any more. I can't fight the system, I'm exhausted in pain. Keep getting sanctioned again and again. Cold and hungry and cannot speak out. I'm so ashamed of this mess. I don't want to say nout. I huddle in the chair with tears in my eyes. The doctor gets angry and sits there and sighs. We want to help you, but you must talk to us. I have been failed by the system. There is no one to trust. I'm handed some tissues and taken aside. I feel so embarrassed. I want to disappear and hide. He gets a nurse and tells them to get some tea. She comes back soon after and hands a cup to me. I break down sobbing and said, not eaten for days. The damn DWP have taken my benefits away. The doctor gets angry and thumps the desk, shouts out, so sick of these disability tests. He writes a referral to the food bank. I have no energy. Just sit there, look blank. Feel too ashamed to walk through those doors. I don't want to go through this no more. But kindness comes to me in all sorts of ways. It helped me get through some very dark days. Friends heard what had happened and rallied around. I got some benefits advice and it was sound. I went to the food bank and walked through those doors. Was so hungry, I grabbed the first thing I saw. Sobbing and hungry, I ate those sausages raw. But I finally went to appeal and got my benefits restored. So this is the second piece I wrote was back in 2012. And it was performed for the 10,000 Cuts and Counting event that Deepak and allies had to remember every human being we've lost from the work capability assessment. And I think it's really prevalent now with PIP and the COVID-19 pandemic. And this was written for a friend of mine, Carol, who took her own life in 2010, and lots of other friends and disability rights activists we have lost since then. This is called Lest We Forget. I miss you every single day. The pain, it never goes away. I hear your voice whispering in the trees, the whispering of the leaves saying, talk to me. I remember every smile in the sun, the days of laughter and having fun, the days of seeing you fight terrible pain. Nothing in this life feels the same again. I have to live without you and be so very strong. I wondered what I could have done. Why did they get it wrong? The stress and the fear, it tore you apart. I feel so much anger within me. Where do I start? I know if you were here right now, here is what you would have said. Put the anger to one side and concentrate on getting justice instead. Get my story out there and get my story told. I am safe from harm now. I will never grow old. I feel you all about me, just beyond my reach. I feel you in the wind in my hair while walking on the beach. Feel your warmth and wonderful spirit in every setting of the sun. Now I am crying once again. I am hurting everyone. Every day without you is tearing at my heart. It is pure hell without you. I hate being apart. I hear you saying to me, you have to go on. Come on, you can do this. You know you are strong. I hate what happened, that you took your life that day. I so wish you had talked to me. We would have found a way. The government have a lot to answer for. Trust me, they do. But I'll make you this promise. I will get justice for you. I will never forget you, and all the others too, or the horrendous hell that you were all put through. You live in my memories and in my heart every day. I just wish there was something to take the pain away. To the thousands of disabled people who have lost their lives, you will live on through us. You will never die. Your stories are so powerful, and your stories will be told. You are not in pain anymore, and you will never be old. To this government, shame on you for this. We who campaign so hard have one lasting wish, to see you face the justice which you so deserve. And we will get the truth out there, and our voices will be heard, lest we forget. Thank you everyone for listening to me. And now it gives me great pleasure to welcome to perform for you tonight, fellow DPAC troublemaker and great disability rights activist, author and poet, Rob Punton. So Rob, over to you.
Can you hear me and can you see me? No, you can't see me, so let's put that right. Can you see me now? Yes, you should. I'm going to do 3 poems for you tonight. Hopefully, if the technology allows. The first one I wrote I was asked to write when people started to die, and somebody asked me to write a poem, and it's called Remembrance. And I'm going to go and tell you a poem I wrote for today. 2 of one's called Oppression, and this other one is called Marching in This Time. So first of all, remembrance. Remembrance. As this pandemic plays out, lights go out all over the world. The lights I speak of are living souls. Christian, Muslims, Sikh, Jew. Religion matters not. Creed or colour is no defence, no protection. Ability or disability is no shield to this horror we all can yield. COVID-19 hits us all. Care and compassion is what we can all wield as we take to the field in defence. So once this lockdown is picked, we can all once more set free. Look up into the white skies where the stars are born to mark the passing of souls. Give praise to those we have lost. Be assured to those who care, those who matter. Your lives mattered. We will honor you. We will remember you. Second poem, as I said, it's called Oppression. Oppression is the same the world over. It may sound or look differently when spoke or read in different languages, whether at home or abroad. The pain and humiliation is the same. What is obvious, even to the most myopic amongst us, is that we cannot be or defeat oppression, capitalism, or the champions of oppression and capitalism in our own. We must build alliances in our streets, across the country, around the world, unite in the fight to bring down capitalism and oppression. Do not stop until we create a world where our people can thrive, not just survive. A world built upon social justice. Finally, marching in this time, as we roll our tiptoe timidly from our places of hibernation after months of lockdown, isolated, fever and fear, unsure of the future we face. We are aware that the world we go out into is a very different place, a very different space. Will be much faster the tempo. It is like it has gone from a bite to me to Handsworth revolution, not only in Handsworth but across the country. Revolution that was whispered silently by the few is now a thunderous clamour to the many up and down this nation, across the whole world, in the matter of months, in the absence of the gathered crowd. The forces of the establishment must know that we are now shouting out loud, you can stick your status quo where the sun don't go, as people, regardless of whether they are black, white, yellow or brown, Christian, Muslim, Jew, Sikh or atheist, able-bodied or disabled, are marching in this time in unison, demanding in multiple languages across the planet. We demand social justice through social change for all our people. Thank you. That's me finished now, thank you.
Rob, thank you so much. Yeah, I read your book so much during the pandemic and everything that you gave me last year, and you know, some brilliant pieces of writing. So thank you so much for the performance tonight. It's an honour to share a performing stage with you, even on online. Right, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our last poet of the evening, Mark Thompson. Mark is a fellow activist, relief teacher, stand up to racism activist, and I've seen Mark perform many a time, and I was blown away by one of his latest pieces of poetry that he performed outside Bromley Magistrates Court for a Black Lives Matter protest only a week ago. I have to apologise to the audience because there may not be captioning for Mark's piece of poetry tonight, but it will be on the DPAC website later on, and you know, so there won't be live captioning for Mark's piece of poetry, but they will be available later. So you know, if we haven't got anyone to interpret, really sorry for the for that. Everything will be up on the website fairly shortly for full access. So without further ado, Mark, it's over to you.
Okay, just checking whether you can hear me.
It's a little bit quiet.
Okay, let me just see. Oh.
And just a message from the voice in the ether. Sam, the BSL interpreter, are you okay to interpret this part? If not, don't worry. Okay.
I'm just going to try and turn off.
That's much better.
That's better in terms of volume?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, brilliant. Apologies, I've had an absolutely crazy couple of days, which is why things weren't sent in advance. I'm hoping that both the poems that I'm going to share will be in the chat. So it might be that some of you are able to access it there. Apologies if you aren't able to access it fully. The first poem is the shorter of the two, and it's called Fair Game. And it's just a bit of a call to arms, really. Probably preaching to the converted, since I guess you're already comrades that are aware of the importance of speaking up. But this is just a reminder, because I think there are times when we all feel like giving up, whether that's to do with what's going on with your particular political party or the situation for the group that you're closest to. And this is just a reminder of how important that we don't give up in those dark moments. And it's called Fair Game. Some claim they don't do politics because it's a game of dirty tricks that powerful people try to fix. I guess that much is true. I too can see what's going wrong. The same sad singers sing the same sad songs, leaving no space for me and you to feel that we belong. But if that leaves us in a rage, which makes us choose not to engage, we leave for them an empty stage to fill with tall tales too short on other points of view. So I beg you not to turn away. Please know your value to the fray. It'll be a dirtier game if you don't play, and maybe slightly fairer if you do. Okay, so that's the first one. This is called, second one's called We Didn't Want to Watch. And as Paula said, I've been doing a lot of events for Stand Up to Racism and in support of Black Lives Matter. This one is trying to explain why the film of the death of George Floyd has had such an incredible impact, given how many terrible stories and even terrible films there have been in the past. It's just trying to explain why this particular film was so powerful. We didn't want to watch, but this film cast the world as extras. No speaking role for us, just places on the sidewalk from where we could not talk. Simply the silent witnesses to scenes that should not be seen. I said, simply the silent witnesses to scenes that should not be seen, but they were. And now we are all haunted by the breathless last of the breath that passed beneath a knee. Oh, to be clear, we're all sure that this has happened before, but this crime, we got to see. And this time, the guilt just could not be any clearer. And in that moment, we couldn't feel any nearer or any more powerless. And as the words of reason poured from round about us, we could tell that they fell on deaf ears. And the darker amongst us saw our darkest fears. Our ancestral mothers above us cried even more tears for yet another soul they would see too soon. But without doubt, what's truly marked this out as a chalk line for change is how reason went unheard. Those that were there had spoken the words that we would have spoken if they had been us. If we had had the chance to cuss 2 bad words in his defense, but in fact, we know because their actions show that all the words in the world would have made no impact on their indifference. This is why fists everywhere have been raised in defiance. Yes, raised in the air past many a tear-streaked cheek of those who now refuse to be so meek and mild. Man, our anger is wild, and like your shame, these words proclaim there is a chance our anger may never be tamed. But let me take a moment to breathe, because that is one privilege that I still have. We've seen some try to shatter Malcolm and Dr. Martin's dreams under jackboots that wish to stomp on the green shoots that grow from the grassroots, who know these 3 words to be true. Black Lives Matter. As to what happens next, well, that's really up to you. And just to reconnect, it's not just Black Lives Matter. People seem to have forgotten Black Lives Matter, but right now, during this COVID crisis that we find ourselves in, it's the lives of our disabled, of our elderly, and of our sick that some people seem to think are of less value than other lives, and they're not. I know you know this. and we have to convince the rest of the world that it's true. In solidarity and in unity, thank you for letting me speak to you today, and I totally support the cause here and stand with you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Mark. Thanks. I mean, that's really great poetry. Thank you so much for your contribution and joining us tonight. This is the end of our access break. Welcome back to our DPAC meeting on eugenics, COVID-19 and international solidarity. And it's been great poetry from Paula and Rob and Mark, so thanks again for that. I'm Clara Paillard. I'm a disabled activist from France who lived in Liverpool for the past 20 years. I'm a trade union representative for PCS Union in Liverpool Museums. And I am the co-president of the PCS Culture Group, representing 4,000 museum workers across the country. Thanks for DPAC to inviting me in sharing the second part, and solidarity to all of you. Thanks for staying with us for this great meeting. We had an amazing first part of the meeting. It was chaired by my good friend Paula, who's done a great job. So stay with us. We've got more amazing speakers tonight from across the world. Remember to share and tweet the meeting with the hashtag Everyday Death Counts. We're now going to hear from amazing speakers from Bolivia, Hungary, Uganda, Germany, Belgium, Spain, Malaysia, and Bulgaria. And so we're running a little bit behind. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first speaker for the second part of the meeting. I'm really pleased to bring in Feliza Ali Ramos. Feliza is a disabled activist from Bolivia. She came over to London in 2018 to speak at the DPAC Alternative Global Summit about the 300-mile march that she led with disabled campaigners on across the Andes, ending a 3-month occupation in La Paz to demand a disability pension benefit for disabled people in Bolivia, and during which a number of campaigners died. So Feliza, this is now for you to contribute, and we're going to have a translation. So bear with us. Feliza, you've got about 10 minutes with your translator. Thank you.
Buenas, ya Karina. Hola. Muy buenas tardes. Primeramente agradecer a Ellen y a Paula, Clara por haberme permitido para que sea parte de esta charla.
For letting me be part of this talk.
Sí, Karina, ¿avanzamos?
Sí, Feli, habla nomás y yo voy a traducir.
Está bien. Entonces, en realidad, en Bolivia, que es Sudamérica, estamos pasando las personas con discapacidad momentos muy difíciles, ¿no? Estamos afectados más en las necesidades básicas, como es la alimentación, el apoyo del asistente personal, no tenemos en nuestras casas.
We are very hurt in our most basic needs. We, for example, don't have resources for personal assistance, and the most basic supplies you can think of, we don't have available.
Es difícil cumplir, ¿no?, las recomendaciones que dan las autoridades en salud, diciendo que hay que limpiar la casa cada media hora, cada 1 hora, hay que salir con apoyo, no hay que acercarse mucho a otros compañeros, todo eso, ¿no? Que tener aislamiento, pero eso es difícil de cumplir aquí, porque nosotros necesitamos sí o sí un asistente personal.
In our context, it's extremely hard to follow the recommendations of the authorities of cleaning our house every half an hour, every hour, and to keep physical distancing, because we need so much of our personal assistance. So in the context that we have, it's truly complicated to abide to the norms of health security.
La situación está difícil porque ya tenemos 1,807 fallecidos, pero no se sabe cuántos de estos fallecidos tienen discapacidad. No tenemos nada de esa información. Tampoco podemos acceder, ¿no?, a las pruebas del COVID, porque aquí ya la gente sin discapacidad amanece para hacer fila y poder acceder a estas pruebas.
So far in Bolivia, we have 1,807 deaths. Out of those, we have no idea how many were disabled people. And the same problem when it comes to tests. Right now, the people without disability and the people that has resources are in massive queues, and we can't access the COVID tests.
El gobierno no está atendiendo nuestras necesidades de discapacidad. Por ejemplo, lo único que han hecho es que se han limitado a dar una canasta familiar de 400 bolivianos, y es una sola vez en todo este tiempo de la cuarentena, ¿no? Que creo que son 40 libras.
So in all of this pandemic, what the government did was just assign us an equivalent of 40 quid per all of the pandemic, and that's obviously not enough.
Y aparte de eso, es que nosotros con la caravana nacional, ¿no?, de discapacidad del 2016, hemos logrado estos 250 bolivianos mensual, que son 25 libras, creo. Pero muchos de los compañeros no están cobrando este bono porque tienen su carnet de discapacidad caducado.
So in 2016, when I led a protest to gain a sort of bonus for disability, a disability allowance of £25 per month, this right is not being executed by our peers because many of them, for example, don't have an up-to-date disability card. So all of this red tape is not allowing us to exercise our rights.
Sobre este tema, nosotros ahora estamos haciendo una investigación, Karina, para saber cuántos compañeros con discapacidad no tienen su carnet de discapacidad para cobrar este bono, porque además no es nuestra responsabilidad, sino los equipos calificadores no están funcionando, entonces no podemos tener un carnet vigente.
So right now what we are doing is research to try and find out how many people don't have the disability card that allows them to get their monthly bonus. And she wants to highlight that this is not their responsibility, but the responsibility of the qualifying teams that should be doing follow-up on the people that need to bring up to date their disability cards.
También estamos gestionando frente al gobierno para que hagan acciones para que puedan cobrar estos compañeros aunque tengan el carnet de discapacidad caducado, porque este tiempo de cuarentena sí o sí necesitan la plata, ¿no? Entonces, también, Karina, estamos, nosotros como activistas en temas de discapacidad, estamos promoviendo, estamos fortaleciendo el movimiento de vida independiente de personas con discapacidad.
So on top of doing this follow-up on the government and the disability cards that are neglected and that are leaving many people with disability without any resources during this pandemic, we are promoting independent living in Bolivia and all of its philosophy.
Por un lado, estamos formando la Red Latinoamericana de Vida Independiente y internamente como Bolivia también nosotros nos estamos fortaleciendo, ¿no? Estamos reestructurando, conformando las asociaciones de vida independiente en centros de vida independiente de personas con discapacidad.
So we are doing a twofold agenda. We are developing a Latin American network of independent living on the one hand, and on the other hand, we are restructuring, we are shaping centers for independent living in the different departments of Bolivia.
Y muchos compañeros nos hemos agrupado. En el caso de Nueva Esperanza en Sucre, que es la pionera en vida independiente, nos hemos agrupado para estar juntos y estamos haciendo capacitaciones internas para entender bien el tema de discapacidad en todos los aspectos.
So a very powerful way to carry along with this is to group ourselves, to organize ourselves. And what we are doing right now, for example, in Sucre, where I am from, is giving training, a lot of training to understand what is independent life and to understand our rights.
Sí, y también estamos haciendo actividades de recaudación de alimentos, ¿no? De comida, de pañales, cosas necesarias para poder sobrevivir esta pandemia. Entonces estamos haciendo campañas de recolección de fondos como asociaciones para dar a nuestros compañeros que están en sus casas encerrados y también nosotros como organizaciones podernos mantener, ¿no?
So since we are self-funded, we have been doing fundraising events to provide for food and nappies, for example, for the peers that are stuck at home, and to basically sustain the organization.
Hay compañeros, Karina, que nos han dicho, ¿no? Cuando hemos llevado 2 kilos de harina, una bolsa de fideo, así, muy agradecidos por todo, ¿no? Porque realmente no tenían que comer, entonces creemos que estamos apoyando.
To give you more context on the kind of support we are able to provide right now. So we visited one peer recently, and we gave just 2 kilos of flour, and he was so happy and he was so thankful, and these kind of small things make a really big difference.
Yo quiero pedir que nosotros sigamos en alianza. La organización que ustedes están dirigiendo es muy importante y nosotros también aquí a nivel de Latinoamérica estamos promoviendo lo que es vida independiente de personas con discapacidad. Nosotros queremos tener la decisión, nosotros queremos opinar y nosotros queremos hacer. Y no que nos los piensen, nosotros sabemos pensar.
We are extremely happy, extremely excited to have a network with you, to be an ally to you, because we want to be the ones deciding on our lives. We want to be the ones to give an opinion. We want to think. We don't want anyone to think on our behalf.
Los centros de vida independiente ahorita, Karina, todavía no tienen plata para trabajar. Nosotros con nuestro esfuerzo, nosotros somos autosostenibles, hacemos actividades para recaudar fondos y poder trabajar, hacer despertar a los otros compañeros también y decirles que tienen derechos, que no es justo que sigan sufriendo por ellos solo, ¿no? Porque la gente les ha dicho que no pueden hacer, no pueden pensar, nada, ¿no? Entonces nosotros seguimos apoyando en eso.
We really keep looking forward on supporting our peers to awaken and to realize their rights. Just because of all of these negative voices telling them that they cannot think for themselves, they cannot do things on their own. So we are self-sustainable, and we really want to keep on doing this work.
Creíamos que con este gobierno íbamos a estar mejor, pero no, seguimos en las mismas. Es más, estamos en un gobierno transitorio, tal vez es por eso, ¿no? Pero no hay avances, no hay siquiera datos, información de cuántos o cómo, cuál es la situación de las personas con discapacidad. Entonces nosotros queremos hacer una investigación sobre la realidad en la que estamos viviendo las personas con discapacidad con este tiempo, ¿no? De la cuarentena.
Karina, after
yes.
this, can you please conclude? Thank you.
Yes, okay, just to close, she mentioned that as the other peer said, there's no data in Bolivia and the government is providing no support whatsoever. It's a transitory government that has no data on the situation of people with disability during the pandemic. Feli, ya cumplimos tiempo.
Muchas gracias y la lucha continúa.
Thank you very much, and the fight is on.
Thank you so much, Feliza. Thank you so much, Feliza, and thank you very much, Karina, for the translation. Solidaridad. I just want to let people know that the story of the 2018 March that was referred to in the speech has been the subject of a film by The Guardian, which is called The Fight, and it's still available to watch online. So it was great to welcome Feliza back. Okay, without further ado, I am gonna move on to our next great speaker, Zora Molnar. Zora is a Hungarian activist, and Hungary has recently been found guilty of grave and systematic violation against disabled people, using the example of the special inquiry triggered by disabled activists in Britain. The European Network for Independent Living supported organization in Hungary to trigger a UN investigation against the government, which is controlled by the far-right party Fidesz. So DPAC will be hosting an online meeting in late August to hear more from Hungarian activists about the situation there that led to the investigation. But tonight we will hear about what has happened there under COVID-19. So over to you, Zora. You've got 8 minutes. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Zora Molnar from Hungary. I have been living in Budapest, which is the capital of Hungary, since 8 years now. And my experience focuses mainly on the capital because most of my fellow activists live also here. So I know that Hungary is very segmented in this geographical sense because people living with disabilities in the countryside are even worse situation than those who live in the capital. But I think so. The lockdown was introduced in Hungary in mid-April, and I think the lockdown basically only strengthened the already existing structural problems people living with disabilities have to face on a daily basis. For example, the system of personal care or personal assistance is a very good example for this because in Hungary we only have personal care available from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. and only on weekdays. So if you have any need during the evenings of the weekdays or during the entire weekend, there is no personal care service available. You can only rely on your family members, friends, or volunteers you may hire. And people with disabilities had to face an even more serious lack of care service because the care service was incredibly overwhelmed during the crisis, and many of the carers were already endangered due to their ages, so they were not allowed to visit their clients, even those who were in the service. And the other segment of the serious problem is the inaccessibility of the healthcare services, because in Hungary, especially this is the case, especially with the state-funded healthcare services, those are not accessible in most cases for people with disabilities. So if you would like to visit a doctor, your only chance is to use private healthcare service, which was not allowed to accept clients and patients during the crisis because they had to concentrate all of their capacity to deal with COVID-19 patients. So all the private healthcare services were closed, which again strengthened and enhanced the problems of people with physical disabilities. When it comes to the quarantine itself, I would emphasize, I would like to highlight a few serious factors which contributed to the negative situation of people with disabilities. One of these is the lack of information. So in most cases, they had no idea how to turn to if they were in need of any kind of assistance or help to run their daily life as they usually do it. One of the reasons of this phenomenon was that the municipalities were forced to establish forced to hire volunteers to deal with the so-called vulnerable social groups, but most of the municipalities focused only on the needs of elderly people, which means that they had no capacity and no special skills and knowledge on how to assist people with disabilities. So on the one hand, they don't know where to turn to if they needed anything. On the other hand, even if they had the information how to call the local municipality, for example, the local municipality had no capacity to help them properly. That was definitely a serious problem. Yeah, and I just heard some of you talking about people with disabilities who were sent home from hospitals because there were an order in place that all the capacities of the hospital are needed for those who may affected by the COVID-19. The same happened in Hungary. A ministerial order entered in the force at the end of April, saying that 60% of the hospital beds need to be emptied for the potential COVID-19 patients. And it meant that many patients who were definitely in need of intensive care and special care services were sent home without any special guideline or any special training for the relatives, and the relatives were just left behind, saying that we have no capacity and no human resource to help you more. And I've heard many stories when people with disabilities or people suffering from chronic illnesses passed away in their homes because there were no proper medical care for them during the crisis, COVID-19 crisis. Yeah, but I can also mention a few good practices. They mostly appeared on local level. So again, we are in a lack of systemic solutions for the challenges we had to face due to the COVID-19. There were some green lines in some districts of Budapest. There were some green lines who were somewhat prepared for the needs of people with disabilities. But for example, for us as an activist group, I am a former member of a grassroots activist group. And for my former fellow activists, it was a serious task to raise the municipality's attention to the need of hire volunteers who may be able to help people with physical disabilities as well. And during the COVID-19 crisis, we had daily press conferences broadcasted by the television, and those press conferences were followed by sign language interpretation. So the general information were available in a somewhat accessible way at least, but there were no guidelines or no specific arrangements for people with physical disabilities. The Ministry of Human
Zora,
Capacities,
if you can conclude soon, that'd be great.
Sure. I just only have one remark for the structure. So the Ministry of Human Capacities put together an action plan at the end in April, but they had no financial resources allocated for the certain steps of the action plan, but all the financial burden and all the burden of the implementation were put on the municipalities. So there was no governmental role in the treatment of this crisis.
Thank you so much, Zora, for giving an insight to what is going on in Hungary, and solidarity to you and fellow activists. Our next speaker is Rose Achayo from the National Union of Women with Disabilities of Uganda, or NOWUDU. It's also great to welcome Rose back, who came to London and spoke at the DPAC Global Summit in 2018 about the work of the National Union of Women with Disability of Uganda, including the work they've done with disabled women in the refugee camps there. So over to you, Rose. Thanks for joining us. If we can unmute Rose. Rose, are you with us? Sorry, I'm just trying to.
Hello, Clara.
Hi, Rose. We can hear you now. Over to you. Lovely to have you with us.
Okay. Okay, thank you so much. I am very honored to be in this meeting today. I have liked the conversation. I just want to start that lockdown, COVID-19 has come, and we Ugandans were locked down on the 18th of March. And this lockdown has affected women and girls with disabilities in the rural areas so much. This is because many women with disabilities were not getting information about the COVID-19, and especially on how to do the preventive measures. Now, because of lack of information, most of the women and girls with disabilities depended so much on hearsay. And this hearsay is because most of them cannot afford to have radios. Most of them cannot afford to have smartphones. So this has made them to be dependent on others. Secondly, the COVID-19 has affected women with disabilities so much because most of these women and girls with disabilities are single mothers. Single mothers who actually depend so much on doing petty businesses. So the lockdown disrupted their activities, which they have been depending for their livelihoods. For example, they have been having challenges of providing food to the table because they have not been doing any activities. And because of that, most of them cannot afford sanitizers, they cannot afford soap, so they have ended up using hash for washing their hands because they want to see how they can protect themselves. The other thing which has also affected us as women with disabilities is the transport means. When the lockdown happened, most of the cars, the public cars, were not moving on the road. They were only allowing private cars. And many of our women with disabilities do not own private cars. But also, what is so challenging up to now is because of the motorcycle riders, whom our women normally use as the cheapest way of transport. Now, those motorcycle riders up to now are not yet allowed to carry human beings, but those motorcycles are only allowed to carry food. So because of that, this has affected our women from accessing services like healthcare services because they cannot move from their homes to the roadside where the stages of public means are. And this has affected them so much. Not just only the sexual reproductive health issues, but the issue of women who are living with HIV/AIDS. They cannot access their drugs, and this has affected them so much physically, but also psychologically. The other thing which is very challenging, which is we are getting overwhelmed as Nwodo, is the issue of sexual and gender-based violence. A number of women and girls with disabilities are so much affected by these abuses of gender-based sexual violence. And what is so annoying is that most of the abusers are the local leaders whom these women and girls with disabilities are supposed to be reporting these cases to them. So this has made us to feel so bad, but we are trying to follow it up so that these ladies can be able to access justice. But also accessing justice without evidence makes it very difficult. For example, the girls who are raped may not be able to have access for PEP. But also the evidence might not be got immediately there because of the time that must have been taken. But what is so annoying is the poverty level amongst these women and girls with disabilities, because the COVID-19 has made them to be now inactive of doing their small businesses, but also the capital that they had has already been evaporated because of the lockdown. They were spending the money for food. The other thing which is very, very sad is also that during this lockdown, other disasters also came in. For example, in Western Uganda, floods came and swept a number of homes. Now, very many disabled women and very many disabled persons are completely, their homes were destroyed, and now they are staying in the camps, and this has brought in more problems in terms of shelter. They do not have shelter, they don't have food, the women are being abused. We have just got reports, over 10 women and girls with disabilities were sexually abused. Some of them have ended up getting unwanted pregnancies. So COVID-19 has come with a lot of challenges that as National Union of Women with Disabilities, we are completely overwhelmed, that we do not know how to go about with all these crises, because we are looking at how do these women survive in terms of their livelihoods, but also how do these women continue to look after their families, looking at that they do not have any source of income now, and we don't see government coming in to interject any resources to help the persons with disabilities. So this is something which is very disturbing, and I feel this meeting is making us to learn and how do we move forward as women and girls with disabilities. So this is the situation in Uganda, but it is too much on our side because we don't see government coming up to see how to help. They are talking of giving loans to business people, but the kind of businesses that our women are engaged in, they may not be able to qualify for those loans, because the loans that they are giving it with some interest. Now, our women may not be able to go in for these businesses. And then the other thing which
Can you conclude, please, Rose?
Yes, I am concluding. One thing that we have seen with this COVID-19, we really think government needs to come out with a very comprehensive social protection that can take care of women and girls with disabilities in terms of their livelihoods. Otherwise, thank you so much. We continue pushing on until one day we live a dignified lives like any other person. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rose. And that's why those meetings are so important, to link up internationally between disabled activists and learn from each other and support each other. Our next speaker is Michael Zander, who is a disabled German activist and lecturer for disability studies and rehabilitation psychology. Michael previously visited DPAC in London with the AK Mob, which is a militant group of disabled campaigners responsible for organizing disability pride events in Berlin. So Michael, the floor is yours. You've got 8 minutes. We're running a little bit behind. If you want to make it 7, you're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to speak with you. I want to make 4 points. My first point is about those who died in Germany. In Germany, at least 200,000 people were infected by COVID-19. And 9,000 people died. A third of them were living in residential care homes. And most of the victims were elderly people, some of them healthcare workers who worked in this residential homes. And there are also some criminal investigations against the owners of such homes. And the accusations include lack of hygiene precautions and lack of protection for workers. That's my first point. My second point is about, I think you also have the discussion in the UK about a triage decision in hospitals. In March, a network of medical societies published a guideline or recommendations for triage decisions, and these guidelines included the so-called clinical frailty scale to measure your impairment and to measure your inability to do things on your own. And this faced a lot of criticisms by organizations of disabled people. And after that, they revised the paper and they clarified that disability or age is no legitimate criteria for triage decisions. But on the other hand, the president of this medical society publicly posed the following question, and I quote, "Does it really make sense to still ventilate people at a very old age who have hardly been able to live on their own for a long time and have severe chronic diseases in an intensive care unit?" So, and this question, of course, is a way to imply, no, it doesn't make sense. This brings me to my third point. My third point is about social Darwinism. I can give you 2 examples. One example is Boris Palmer. Boris Palmer is member of the Green Party and mayor of the city of Tübingen, and he is famous for holding far-right views within the Green Party. In an interview with a private TV station, he said the following, and I quote, "Let me say to you quite brutally, in Germany, we are possibly saving people who would be dead anyway in half a year because of their age and previous illnesses." Another example was a German finance manager, a rich guy, Alexander Debelius. He suggestively asked in a newspaper if it's right that 10% of the really threatened population will be spared, but 90%, including the entire national economy, will be extremely handicapped. And this is, of course, the same direction, implying it's not worth it to save 10% of the population. In my opinion, it is difficult to say how common or how popular such Darwinist views are. at least according to polls, most of the people in society support the governmental measures and the lockdown until now, at least. On the other hand, it's a common prejudice that disabled and elderly people are the only people who are at risk. But we know, of course, that this is not true. And my final point is about a new law in Germany about ventilation. This law was not in the first place directly linked to the COVID pandemic, but now I think it gets a lot of more weight, more importance. This was, I think, the most important struggle of the disability movement in Germany. Last year, the Conservative Minister of Health, Jens Spahn, introduced a draft for a law which imposes rules on people who are in need of help because of ventilation. And the first draft of the law said it is mandatory for those people to leave their homes and move to a special care unit. And the official reason for that was so-called corruption among ambulant caregivers and undersupply by people who for people who live at home. But the real reason was made public by the disability movement. In the draft, comments said that the aim is to save millions of money for the government. And after protests of the disability movement, especially two groups, one group is called Ability Watch, the second group is ALS Mobile of patients with amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. They were very, very active. And after the protests, a second version of the draft was made. And now you depend on your healthcare insurance. They have to make a judgment if you wish to live at home is justified or not, and they have to consider your so-called justified wishes if you want to stay at home. So the protests brought some made some things better, but the law still is a very bad law, and experts say it violates the UN Convention of the Rights of Disabled People, where you should have a choice whether you want to live at home or in an institution. Okay, I think this were my 4 points, and I think I'm right in time.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Michael. You've been very good with time, so really appreciate it. And I think that we see that everywhere the rights of disabled people is being violated, COVID being another example. Our next speaker is Nadia Hadid, who is the co-chair of the European Network on Independent Living, and she lives in Belgium. So Nadia, the floor is yours. You've got 8 minutes. If you want to do it in 7, that's great. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be part of this important conversation. I will start firstly with the situation in Belgium. Belgium, with Brussels, the capital of Europe, where the current pandemic has significant negative impacts on the daily lives of people with disabilities. So the negative effects are linked to the health crisis, and confinement are multiplied for disabled people. So even in the recent week, there are more than usually, they have been faced head-on with the lack of accessibility of public mainstream goods and services. They just stopped without any alternative. Disability organizations had no access to basic medical protective materials as gloves, masks of disinfection, alcoholic hand gel. So those living in the society who were really included were really left behind when it was about support services, and even when it was about person assistance. There were no directives. So they didn't receive any aid or support themselves. So it was up on their good kindness and willingness if they wanted to continue work and support us to stay at home or not. So myself, I lost my 8 hours of support on Monday, and I lost my 8 hours of support on Friday. So those days I was not supposed to continue to live. So happily we were forced to go back to family and to back again to have again volunteers who supported us due to lack of services. And so, and even so, we are living in inside the community. But those who are living in institution, for example, the 40,000 in Flanders, they couldn't leave anymore, and even not during the weekend to visit their family. Once they were in, they could not go back, or they were obliged to have 14 days of complete isolation. But the funny thing about this, the institution continued to send them the bills. So the parents were obliged to send the bills, even if they put their own children out of institution to take care about them themselves. We had also, sadly enough, Belgium is very institutionalized. We have daycare centers where more than 50,000 people are attending them daily. So they closed them from one day to another. So they were all dropped back into their families, and they were pushed, or if they couldn't have enough family support, they were pushed to go back living in institution while they were living in the community. There was a lot of abuse within the families and within the volunteers who were supporting the families, and those were deprived from all their rights, and they couldn't even go out or mention that they have been abused. It's only now that testimonies are coming out slowly, but as they are still relying on their families, they say, well, that's no harm. I don't want to make a big plaint about it. So people with disabilities have been feeling that they have been second-class citizens whose rights are even more violated than usually. So the current crisis only increased the magnificent glass effect on what they often experience on a daily basis, and it is exclusion and loneliness. We have also 85% of the children with disabilities in Belgium, they go to special schools. Yeah, we are the leaders in Europe with special schools for children with disabilities. But only 15% of those children could easily follow the online courses. And so the only solution that the government found was just to relieve all the other children from their school obligation. So the lack that they will have next year is not important for the government. And so I will also highlight a little bit the triage, how it happened in Belgium. So the first question was quality of life. So the survival chances and the life years to be saved are the two first criteria that a doctor can use if he need to choose between two people arriving at the same time, if they have a disability. And these are already very difficult to answer objectively. And if there is no difference between the patient for people without disability, it's first come, first serve principle, whereby the order of arrival simply counts. But when it's about person with disability, then it's also, it's even incorporated in the ethical guidelines of the Belgian medical world, that it's about the quality of life. And so these guidelines are already excluding disabled persons like me, because we need too much assistance, it will be too costly, it will be too time assuming. When we lobbied for this, the Federal Minister of Health, she said in the plenary of the parliament that indeed that the lives of persons with disability matter, but there has been no change in the legislation or in the guidelines. So from human rights perspective, the medical ethical guidelines really do not eliminate any kind of discrimination against persons with disabilities. And also all those media, from the official media, they didn't give the right image of persons with disabilities. and there was a lack of awareness raising around it, like the Article 8 from the CRPD stipulate. It was not respected at all. They only could see person as disability as beneficiary from care, or people who really need charity and extra support. They need to be seen as potential stakeholders, as active members within the society, working and participating at equal level of all the other citizens, was completely ignored. So now we really went a step backwards about the paradigm shifts within society. So that's a new fight that we are going to face. And also the right to live, as Article 10 is stipulated, is completely forgotten in this crisis situation. There's also now suddenly they discovered that there was no action plan for a situation of risk and humanitarian agents emergency. And within Belgium, we had sadly enough 18,000 deaths, and 65 of those people who died were living in institution or elderly houses, and they were locked and segregated. We have no concrete data available for the moment of how many of those people were really still young and were not and died because they were segregated in those institutions. So normally it's now the right moment to call for deinstitutionalization and emergency situation to protect ourselves, because they firstly, and they said that they put people in collective care to protect them. But now it's obviously that it's not the case. 2/3 of the persons who died were living in those segregated institutions. So it is really about time now to think about deinstitutionalization. So instead to have concrete data.
If you can conclude now, Nadia.
Yes. So just to say that we have a disability right monitor, the lounge with email that you can find on the website. And when it's about international solidarity, we are working on the SDGs really to leave no one behind. And we are lobbying on European level, because Europe is the biggest donor to third world countries, that there should not have any impact on that solidarity with development countries. And we are hoping that through this we could help each other, and like all the others said, that every life, a decent quality of life, is important for all kinds of disabled people wherever we live. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nadia, and solidarity to you and the comrade in Belgium. We were going to have a presentation by Wong Loong, the Vice President of the Malaysian Confederation of the Disabled. Unfortunately, it is like the middle of the night in Malaysia, and Wong Yoon hasn't been able to join. However, we have got a paper copy of the presentation, and therefore we will make the presentation available online, so you will be able to access it on the DPAC website. But we really want to thank Wong Yoon for contributing anyway. He was really keen to join us, but I think it's 4 a.m. in the morning in Malaysia. So our next speaker is Kapka Panayotova, who is the founder of the Center of Independent Living in Sofia in Bulgaria, and has been instrumental in spreading the philosophy of independent living in that country. She's also a good friend of Deepak, co-founder Debbie Jolie. So Kapka, we're really happy to have you with us tonight. You are next.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Clara. And really, Deepak is very special to me because of Debbie, who was a good friend of mine. I wonder if I can share my screen and show you a presentation. Do you see it?
Yes, we can see it now, thanks.
Okay, good. So I want to to talk about independent living and COVID in Bulgaria. Actually, Bulgaria was in some way lucky because we were somehow surrounded, somehow bypassed by the COVID-19 pandemic, with some number of cases like less than 7,000 from the beginning until July 11th, with 267 deaths registered, and or more than 3,000 people have been cured. So actually, we do not have an extremely severe epidemic situation, but still there was a lockdown for maybe 2 months. And actually, what my friends from the independent living movement used to say was that we are always at home. And this is because something that I will tell you in a minute, the medical model in Bulgaria is still prevailing. Actually, in the whole period of a pandemic situation, there was no reporting of any correlation between COVID-19 and disabilities. And actually, there were no testimonies of people who would be in any way discriminated in the health system due to their disability. They either choose not to share, or there weren't such cases. Basically, people prefer to stay home and avoid any contacts with larger public for their own safety. A lot of disabled Bulgarians are institutionalized. They are placed in institutional care, either big or small group homes.
Sorry, Kapka, sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah.
Just 1 second. Because you are sharing a screen, that doesn't work for everybody.
Okay.
So people should be able to escape the full screen, and then you would see Kapka again. But they won't see the interpreter. So we're just trying now. Hopefully that's working.
So do you want me to stop sharing or what?
If you could for now, please, and I'll let
Sure.
you know if you can share again. Thanks.
Sure.
Sorry about that.
No, it's okay. I just wanted to make it easier for comprehension. You know, when you look at these things, seems, at least for me, it's easier to understand and comprehend.
Kapka, we will make your presentation available online, but if you can carry on without it, that would be great. Thank you.
Sure. Yes, I can do that. Actually, people prefer to stay home and avoid any contacts with larger public for their own safety. So I haven't heard about large numbers of people being stuck in COVID-19 situation. However, the staff of large institutions have been tested for coronavirus, and that there was only one case in a group home, actually in a large institution for elderly, who probably were disabled, most of them, where the staff got infected, but apparently not the residents, or at least that was the public information. So in terms of COVID, Bulgaria was really lucky in a way. And there is another reason for me to say that, because the Bulgarian healthcare system isn't prepared to accommodate the needs of disabled people, and this is the crazy thing, because the medical model is still prevailing, and the healthcare system is not prepared to accommodate us. So it's really crazy, but that's how it is. And let me tell you about the independent living now in Bulgaria, which actually started back in 1995 with the birth of CIL Sofia, Center for Independent Living, which is registered as an organization run and controlled by disabled people. We are one of the very active members of the European Network on Independent Living. Hello, Nadia, lovely to have heard you. The situation is of very, very backward, very outdated policy, which is in terms of disabilities, with a lot of people locked behind doors of large institutions or small group homes. Most of the group homes have been built with EU money, and this is something that CIL, together with ENIL, now is challenging the situation of how EU funds have been spent in the European Court of the in the Court of European Union. So there were definitely misuses of money. So one of the things that CIL is doing really very good is promotion of independent living and getting as many disabled people as possible involved in demonstrations and direct actions. You will see in the presentation a picture of a bunch of disabled wheelchair users who had prisoners' jackets on them, which was a demonstration a couple of years ago with the message that we are imprisoned without being guilty, without being sued. So actually, it's like being convicted without having committed any crime. And the situation has not improved at all. The movement continues to be weak and vulnerable because no funding for empowerment, peer support, or independent living promotion is available at the moment.
If you can conclude soon, please.
Yes. Basically, the money goes to the so-called traditional disability organizations. And in terms of solidarity, this is something that I wanted to say a couple of words, which have not been heard around and in this conference either. And it's the solidarity within our countries and among disabled people, because we know that governments are lousy in most of the countries. There is no news about that. But I would say that disabled people need to be more critical to themselves. We need to be critical to us, because most of the disabled people in Bulgaria either do not care and tend to complain without willing to be involved in action, or they join the traditional disability organizations, which are well subsidized by the government and which promote the outdated models. And last but not least, currently there are huge protests around the country. Only in Sofia there were 30,000 people in the streets. And apparently I was one of the very few protesters, disabled protesters today. So we need to be critical both to the governments, our governments, that no doubt about that, but we also need to see our flaws, the flaws within the movement or within the community of disabled people, if there is such community at all. Thank you very much, and it was really my pleasure to be with you guys.
Thanks so much, Kapka, and sorry we couldn't see your presentation for the whole time, but we had
I will
access
send it to
issues.
you. I will
Yes.
send it to you.
Thank you so much for your contribution. We're moving towards the end of our meeting. We still got one speaker that I'm going to introduce. It's Nues Rossellini, who is a campaigner for visually impaired people's rights in Barcelona, and is active in the Catalan independence movement. And I'm really pleased that Nues was able to join us at late notice. But you have got 4 minutes, Nues, if that's okay. The floor is yours.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. First of all, I would like to clear that my name is Neus Salvat. I don't know why
Sorry about that. Really
sorry?
Sorry about that.
Okay,
Salvat.
okay. Neus Salvat, yes. And well, thank you for inviting me. And well, my organization we don't work in general activity in general subjects. We just have some aims because it's not a very big organization. So we focus in accessibility, access to the culture, and access to working. So that's why I cannot give very general look to the situation of disabled people after this crisis. What we are noticing is that, for example, we were very active with the law that organizes the you know that in Barcelona there are a lot of many things in the street. For example, the restaurants have a lot of tables in the street. So now, well, there was a law that organizes this in order not to make that all these things, all these tables are not a problem for disabled people when we are walking around the street. So now with COVID, the thing is that well, as restaurants have been locked down, have been closed, so they have lost a lot of money. And what has the town hall of Barcelona done? Well, they have said that they can increase the number of tables and the number of people who are in the street. And so they have changed the law that regulates all these things. So they said they were going to do these changes until December 2031 and 2020. But now, as the things, well, with the idea that they have been very slow in giving this license of changing this, increasing the number of tables and all this, they are going to give 1 year more. So the thing is, this is an example of our, we are worried about this kind of things. Now it's because of this crisis, but how can we be sure that this will not be a way of returning to things that we more or less had we have got some advantages, and now we are going to lose all these things. For example, the same is perhaps will happen in the museums. We were allowed to have some guided visits for blind people, for example, and now with this crisis, perhaps, well, they are changing all these things because it's a problem that we can touch things and all this. So we can understand that there is a problem now, but we are very worried because we think that perhaps this will be an excuse to return to things that, or to forget all the good practices that we had until now, some of them. And another problem is, for example, in the streets, they are now it's all changing because they want to increase the number of, they want to lessen the people who goes in the public transports, which is for us is very necessary. And they want, for example, people to go in with the bicycles and this kind of new new kind of things for moving, which are not very easily well, they don't have very clear regulations for traffic, and we are very worried because we think that our mobility will be we supposed it will be less secure because
can you conclude, please, Nues?
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
So in conclusion, our fear is that all the regulations that now are taken because of the crisis, perhaps they will it will be a way of returning to bad practices that were a little better for us in the last times. And many thanks for letting me participate and letting me know all about here all these people that are very very interesting. They have very interesting contributions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nues. And I was like very interested. You mentioned the museums because I work in museums, and certainly that's new measures being brought in, you know,
Yes.
can be discriminatory. So it's very important that we don't lose all the good practice progress that have been made. So thanks a lot. Thank you to all our speakers. I mean, this was the last meeting in a series of online meetings that DPAC has hosted. But meetings from the previous weeks are available to watch again on the DPAC's Facebook page, YouTube channel, and the Twitter feed. So don't hesitate to check those out. I'm gonna hand over in a minute to Rogers to sum up. But first of all, I just wanna give a very, very big thank to all the speakers that have been fantastic, but also our interpreters and palantypists that have done a fantastic job tonight. Especially we had a few changes during the meeting and we went over time. So thanks a lot to all of you. And thanks to you for watching at home and taking part. So I would like now to hand over to close this meeting to Roger Lewis. Roger is on the DPAC National Steering Group and is a trade unionist with Unison. Roger, the floor is yours to close the meeting. Take care. Everybody.
Thank you, Clara. Thank you, Clara. And what a fantastic evening. What a superb event. What a privilege to have had the benefit of listening to the experiences and the work of all of those contributors from all around the world. We live, of course, now in the shadow of COVID-19. We've heard of what this has done with herd immunity, with triage, the re-emergence of eugenics. in governments around the world, the scandal of what that means in terms of death of so many disabled and elderly people. Those of us involved in this meeting today are in the vanguard of fighting back against that. And it's a shared responsibility that we have to move forwards and develop these links as much as we can and support each other as we try to fight back against what's happening. Also, of course, with COVID-19, we're going to face the reality of governments around the world to do whatever they can to make us pay for the loss of profits to big business. And we need to oppose that in every way, shape and form we can. We also face the real spectre of the global threat from climate change that seriously risks the whole future of humanity. With the spectacle of rising sea levels, of droughts, that breeds poverty and disease and creates the movement of people around the world as this crisis develops. We need to be in the vanguard of that and bringing these whole things together. The two things are related. The big business, the use huge farming techniques that seem to have led to the development of the COVID-19 is part of a system which creates climate change and global warming. And we need to hold those people to account. The reality for us is that another world, a better world, is possible. A world where we put people before profit. We have to redouble our efforts to make that a reality. So getting through the COVID-19 crisis by working together, forging these links. And I want to end with saying we need a common commitment, which I'm sure we can all agree on from today's meeting, which is that we decide and agree to redouble our efforts, to grow these links, to grow this network, to support each other in supporting and fighting for the needs of disabled people around the world. That's got to be our starting point. So I'll finish with this, which is I'd just like to wish everybody stay well, stay safe, and stay strong. United, we can make a difference. United, we can change the world. Solidarity and good evening.